We're in the midst of a series called Seven Deadly Sins. Last week was pride, and this week is sloth. Let's begin with the 6th verse of Proverbs chapter 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. The ant has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? You can say that, use this on your husband when he's watching football this afternoon. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a bandit, and scarcity like an armed man. There ends the reading. It's a Sunday morning, and a woman bursts in the bedroom, and she says, Robert, it's time to get up. And he rolls over and pulls the pillow over his head, and he says, oh, no, not again. Do I have to go to church? She said, yes, Robert, you've got to get up right now. He said, look, I don't want to get up. I'm tired. It's boring down there, and a lot of the people don't even like me. She says, but Robert, you have got to get up and go to church. He turns over and he gets up on one knee and he says, okay, then you tell me 3 reasons why I should get up and go to church. And she said, well, first of all, some of the people down there are nice. Second, they are expecting you. And third, Robert, for heaven's sakes, you're 45 years old and the minister. Get up. The problem that Robert has, believe it or not, may not be laziness. It goes deeper than that. Sloth is a disease of the soul whose symptoms has been so beautifully described by Dorothy Sayers, who said, it is the sin that believes in nothing, cares for nothing, seeks to know nothing, interferes with nothing, enjoys nothing, loves nothing, hates nothing, finds purpose in nothing, lives for nothing, and remains alive only because there is nothing it would die for. The one-word summary is whatever. This is the sin of nonchalance in the presence of God. It's the ho-hum that says, how little can I get away with and still go to heaven? We see sloth in the sin of long-time Christians who no longer attend church regularly. It's like I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Now I've graduated to enjoy my weekends. It's sloth when we turn grace into an unlimited credit card for self-indulgence. Like someone once said, I love to sin, God loves to forgive. My, how the world is admirably arranged. But Jesus said to the church of Laodicea, because you are lukewarm, I will spew you out of my mouth. But here's the kicker. What makes this such an insidious sin is that sloth has a way of masking itself as the exact opposite, as busyness. It's the great psychiatrist Rollo May who once said it is the unique characteristic of the human species that the more lost he is, the faster he runs. In other words, behind that Bataan death march of our daily schedules, where we're just running in this zombie-like state from meeting to meeting and carpools and lessons, we might want to look in the mirror and say, could it be that I'm running away from myself? Could it be that multitasking isn't the same as thinking? Am I committing the sin of being too lazy to take control of my life? Someone has said that half of the sins that are committed in the world today are committed to avoid boredom. Think about that. Half the sins of the world today are simply committed to avoid boredom. I honestly believe that when middle-aged couples maybe stray from their spouse, it's really not the sin of lust, most often as much as it is out of sheer, flat-out boredom. In fact, as you read the parable of the prodigal son, I believe that if you read between the lines, you're going to see that what drove that young man off into the far country really was probably a terminal case of the ho-hums. He probably was thinking, I cannot face milking another cow. I am out of here, to the far country. Well, it's what B.B. King says in his song, the thrill is gone, baby. Are you stuck in a place perhaps in your life where you just are ready to bolt out of this one foot in front of the other so-called existence that, for lack of a better term, you call life? Well, let me just say there's no sin in getting to that point of sloth. But the sin is to stay there and to not do something about it. Someone has said that most people live their lives between the dreaming and the coming true, and then they die with most of their music in them. But that's not the way we Christians live, and there is no excuse for us living that way as Christians. So let me just ask this. What if this morning you drill down into yourself and lo and behold, you find a big, hairy, three-toed sloth living in your soul? What should you do about it? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through 3 things you should do to each of those toes. You got to grab each of those toes to get that sloth and get him on the way and get that critter moving. And the first thing you got to do is you got to grab hold of that sloth by the toe, and you got to say to that sloth, you got to get out of here. You have to evict that sloth from your life. And otherwise, he will infect you with a deadly disease with the name of entropy. Entropy. And entropy is a term from science. It comes from the second law of thermodynamics. And what it says is matter tends toward randomness. In other words, everything in life is naturally tending toward dissolution and decay. So if you want to maintain anything that matters to you in life, it's going to take constant focus, energy, and attention. For example, if you stop pouring energy into your yard, what is your yard going to look like? It's going to look like my backyard. Or if you stop pouring energy into your body and working out, how is your body going to look after a period of time? If you stop putting energy into your marriage, what's going to happen to your marriage? Here's an interesting phenomenon. If you think about it, you had friends on your Christmas card list 5-10 years ago, and they're not on your Christmas card list that you're going to send out this December. Why is that? Because you haven't had the time and energy to give to those relationships. Somebody has said is that friends are like teeth. You got to floss your teeth if you want to keep them, and you got to stroke your friends if you don't want to lose them either. In other words, we must continue to focus. The same is true in our relationship with God, that worship is our sustained investment week by week in our relationship with God. And you know what? If we start moving out of regular focus on our relationship with God, we're going to take a hit in our intimacy with God, just as our body would take it if we were no longer to work out. This is the law of entropy. On the other hand, when someone follows the path of least resistance through their lives, there comes a point, the terrible point in their life where they reach the state where they can learn to live with mediocrity. Sloth and mediocrity go hand in hand. I'll never forget one time, years ago, I was in a church and I had a choir director. And after one particularly painfully awful anthem one Sunday morning, I asked her about it. And her response was, well, that was good enough for church. I'm not sure it was 2 days or 2 weeks later that she was gone. Sloth and mediocrity go hand in hand. And anything that matters to you, if it matters at all, it's going to take focus constantly. And if we don't do that, focus entropy is going to set in. It's going to happen faster than we could ever think. Sort of like the story of Herman the Sloth walking through the jungle one day. And Herman the Sloth ran across a whole gang of snails, and the snails were bad snails. And the snails mugged Herman the Sloth. And after a few hours, Herman found himself at the foot of a tree, and he was in cuts and bruises on him, and he thought, I've got to get me to a police station. And so he decided to get up, and about 2 hours later, he managed to get up, and he made his way to the police station. He walked in. The sergeant said, oh, my goodness, you look terrible. What happened? And Herman said, a bunch of snails beat me up. And the police sergeant said, well, did you get a description? And Herman said, I'm not sure. It all happened so fast. Do not give Herman a home in your heart. The second toe you're going to want to grab hold of is this. Celebrate enthusiastic people. Even though, let's be honest, enthusiastic people often get on our nerves. And sometimes when you're around these gung-ho, rah-rah people, you just want to pour a bucket of ice water over their heads. You know, that's the actual fact. A case in point in the Gospels is Simon Peter. What's so interesting to me about Simon Peter is Simon Peter was the most gung-ho of all the disciples, and preachers are always treating Simon Peter as the buffoon of the Bible. I mean, he is Rodney Dangerfield in Roman sandals. And a case in point of that is on the night the disciples were all out in the water on the boat in the Sea of Galilee, and it was stormy. They were afraid. And here came Jesus walking across the water. Remember that story? And Peter says, "Lord, call me to come to you." And sure enough, Jesus called him to come to him. And Peter, out of sheer exuberant love of Jesus, he hurled his big body over the gunwales, and he looked at Jesus, and he stepped out in faith for just about 2 seconds. And then he took his eyes off Jesus and splashed down he went. And so what do preachers say? Peter, what a failure. Oh my goodness, he took his eyes off the Lord. Are you kidding me? I mean, if I'm Peter, the rest of my life I'm going 3 steps. I walked on water for 3 steps. No human had ever done that before except Jesus Christ himself. 3 steps. Well, Jesus put Peter in charge of his church. The problem, my friend, he says that the church today is frustratingly safe. What's happened to the churches is a lot like what's happened to roller coasters. Yeah, many of you remember if you were my age or a little bit younger, roller coaster, you go down to the amusement park, you'd pay your money, you'd get your ticket, you would jump in that roller coaster and away you'd go. And the only thing you had was a little bar across your lap between you and death. If you were fat, you lived, you know? And what happens today is, you're bolted in and you're strapped with crosses and harnesses and all this sort of thing. And then they put in this great big helmet on top of you and all the rest. That's the church today. It is frustratingly safe. It's a place where people have lost the fine art of wave walking. We need a generation today that will get out of the boat and go and meet Jesus Christ in a place so terrifying that your hair stands up straight on end, in a place where you feel more alive than you ever dreamed possible. And don't let the naysayers get you down. I bet there were some of those disciples there on the boat that day who probably said, "Oh, geez, there he goes again. What a show off. I hope he sinks." There's something about the call of God that isolates you from other people. But don't let the naysayers get you down. I believe God happily forgives the sins of overenthusiastic people. Well, how does this happen? How do we lose our enthusiasm, particularly in the church? I have a mentor and a hero of mine by the name of Earl Palmer, and here's what he says about the church. He says, "A man or woman or it's first united with a Christian church because of having discovered and believed in Jesus Christ and his love. After a few years of being a Christian, that person becomes a leader in the church, having heavy responsibilities for the fellowship. But something happens along the way. That person who, because of giftedness and hard work, may now stand at the vortex of church politics and decision-making, experiences a subtle shift in style of life. That person is adrift as a disciple and finds him or herself motivated and nourished by the organization or by controversy or by ambition to hold power. The first love has been replaced and abandoned, and in its place is the starchy, high cholesterol diet of activity and church work that will never nourish the human soul." And then this profound insight. The irony of this latter condition is that the Christian becomes totally preoccupied, fascinated with themes and goals, which never would have won him or her to the church in the first place. Arguments over politics or denominational issues. How can that happen to us? It happens to marriages. It happens to human friendships. It happens in the life of discipleship. Well, where do you go to get your passion back? I'll tell you what works for me. And that is, I go back to be around the people who are around me who are discovering Jesus Christ as their first love in real time. To spend time with the people who are fresh in their first love. For example, let me just give you an example of that. A couple of weeks ago, Becky and I went to a charity in the community, and we were walking along at this event, and up to us walked a young couple who introduced themselves as new members of the church, and then they said, as we started talking, that a year ago, Palm Sunday, they were totally secular. The woman had just grown up with a kind of nominal Catholic background, and that a year ago, Palm Sunday, about that time, they were putting one of their twin boys to bed, and the boy was crying, and the mom said, "What's wrong?" And the boy said, "If my brother were to die, I wouldn't be able to love him." And the mom said, "Well, don't worry about that because we'll go to heaven." And this little boy, 4 years old, said, "Mommy, what's heaven?" And that was the thing that set her off. And that family attended a year ago, Palm Sunday. And to make it a long story short, this last May, I baptized the dad and both of those boys. And that couple this morning is teaching Sunday school, and they are attending Bible studies, and they are the happiest that they have ever been in their lives. I don't know about you, but that just drives me up through the roof with enthusiasm, because it shows the stuff I'm saying up here is true. Jesus is alive. He's on the loose. He is changing hearts and minds and blessing the community around us where we live. And then I want you to grab a hold of toe number 3. And then toe number 3, this is one you gotta have to be really tough. You gotta twist toe number 3, because the third way you get rid of sloth, and sometimes this is the only way, and that is through tough love. You got to make it hurt a little. It says in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24, "Let us consider ways to stir one another up to love and good works." Reminds me of the northerner who had never been to the South, lived in Connecticut, and finally one day his business required a trip for him to come to Atlanta. He flew into Hartsfield. His whole life, he'd been hearing about Waffle House. And they told him, everybody, you got to go to Waffle House, you got to go to Waffle House. And so he rented his car and he got off at the first exit. It doesn't matter which exit you get off at. There's always a Waffle House, right? So he walks in and he orders a menu, and the waitress comes over and gives him the menu, and he's looking through the menu and he sees this thing that says grit. And he calls the waitress over and he says, "What's a grit?" And this waitress with this deep Southern accent says, "Honey, they don't come by themselves." You know, we Christians, we don't come by ourselves. We need each other. Let us stir one another up with good works and love. Abraham Lincoln in 1950 wrote a letter to his stepbrother, and the brother's name was John D. Johnston. And in it, John D. Johnston is asking him to loan him some money. And over the years, John D. Johnston had asked Abraham Lincoln to lend him money, and he'd always given it. But this time, Abraham Lincoln decided to show some tough love to his stepbrother. He writes, "Dear Johnston, your request for $80 I do not think it best to comply with now. At the various times when I have helped you a little, you have said to me, we can get along very well now, but in a very short time I find you in the same difficulty again. Now this can only happen by some defect in your conduct. What that defect is, I know. You are not lazy, but you are an idler." Isn't that diplomatic? "You aren't lazy, but you are an idler. I doubt whether since I saw you, you've done a good whole day's work in any day. This habit of uselessly wasting time is the whole difficulty. It is vastly important to you, and still more so to your children, that you should learn to break the habit. You are now in need of some money, and what I propose is that you shall go to work tooth and nail for somebody who will give you money for it. And to secure you a fair reward for your labor, I now promise you that for every dollar you will, between this and the 1st of May, get for your own labor, I will then give you one other dollar. Now, if you'll do this, you will be soon out of debt, and what is better, you will have a habit that will keep you from getting in debt again. But if I should now clear you out of debt, next year you would be in just as deep as ever. Affectionately, your brother, A. Lincoln." Well, can't you just hear that hairy old sloth crawling out of the soul of John D. Johnston? I remember one time when I was in seminary, I wrote a term paper for the great philosopher of religion, Diogenes Allen, at Princeton Seminary, where I attended. And I got it back, and I saw the cover. There was a relatively good grade, but he'd written underneath it in his own handwriting, it said, "This may represent your best work, but I doubt it. Mainly what I see here is promise for doing a whole lot better." Well, I'll tell you, the next paper I wrote for Diogenes Allen, I killed myself. I stayed up all night long, anything to make it the best I could. Let us consider ways to stir one another up to love and good works.